Hi there. Well, the country continues to be gripped with Rugby World Cup fever. And of course, the big news for New Zealand and the very sad news was the loss of Dan Carter with that terrible injury. I spoke to Dan on Sunday, actually, and passed my commiserations. It's pretty tough on a guy who spent 4 years building up for the Rugby World Cup. It's tough on New Zealand because he's such a fantastic player. But I'm sure that the All Blacks will regroup. Our challenge is to get behind them and give them all the support. They're a fabulous team. They can do it even without Dan Carter, and I'm sure they will. So we wish them all the very best for the rest of the tournament. Got to say, the tournament is going extremely well. The feedback I get from one end of the country to the other is that people are having a great time. New Zealanders are wonderful hosts. They're embracing the event. They're making those tourists from far afield feel incredibly welcome, and it's really been a wonderful event for New Zealand. So I think the country should feel very proud about the way we are hosting Rugby World Cup 2011. Last week, New Zealand was downgraded in its credit rating from both Standard & Poor's and Fitch. That's as a result of the fact that we'd been on negative outlook, and so those rating agencies at some point in the 2-year cycle are forced to make the decision whether we come off negative outlook or ultimately are downgraded. The decision to downgrade New Zealand was one that was made on the basis of a couple of things. Firstly, the international environment, particularly in Europe, but also in the United States, which is much weaker than it has been for some time, and the concerns that the rating agencies have about the fragile nature of the international funding markets. The second thing is what they call net external liabilities. In other words, how much money New Zealand owes as a country in totality, if you like, to foreigners. When you look at the makeup of New Zealand debt, what you see is that the government debt is actually quite a low proportion. So we're about 20% of GDP. To give you some idea, the OECD average is about 80% of GDP. So we're much lower than most other countries. Our problem has come with the build-up in private sector debt, which particularly occurred between about 2003 and 2007, when house prices rose dramatically. New Zealanders borrowed a lot of money, around about $100 billion, and used that money for a variety of things, including consumption. In short, there isn't a simple way to resolve that issue. What is really important is that we make our economy more competitive, that we lift our overall incomes, and that we allow New Zealanders to save more and ultimately to fund more of our future growth in our country. So that's one of the reasons, for instance, that in Budget 2010 we went through the tax changes we did, lowering personal taxes and increasing consumption tax to deter consumption and increase people's capacity to save, to pay off their mortgage and to build up their assets. It's a long process. We're doing a lot better than we were. In fact, 3 years ago, we owed external liabilities of about 86% of our economy. Today, they're 69%, so we're doing better. Some people will claim that it's a result of the government's accounts. That's factually and fundamentally wrong. In fact, the rating agencies go to some lengths saying that they actually like the actions that the government's been taking. We plan to be back in surplus by 2014-15. The economy is growing, our unemployment rates are falling. And so from that perspective, it's important to understand where we need to focus our attention, and that is very much on trying to lift those levels of private sector savings. As I say, it's not always necessarily easy. Even if you look at Australia, which has compulsory superannuation, they also themselves have very high levels of net external liabilities. It certainly does reflect a more fragile international environment. And we have seen a great many countries being downgraded by Standard & Poor's. I think 9 of the last 10, in fact, have been downgraded. What it does show you, though, is that the government is on absolutely the right track, making sure that we strengthen our balance sheet, that we get back into surplus, that we don't borrow money at excessive rates. That's why it's good news that we've halved our deficit this year, despite the large deficit primarily driven off the Christchurch earthquakes. We're halving it again the year after, and then we'll be back in surplus. What we need at the moment is good, stable macroeconomic policy. What we don't need is the prescription that Labour is proposing, which is more borrowing, more spending and more taxation. New Zealand cannot afford that at the moment. We need to be a competitive economy, and we ultimately need to lift national savings. I would say it's taken a long time, probably 30 years to get to this overall position, and it's going to take somewhat time to unwind it. The only other important part is that one of the things that drives these external liabilities is our current account, and that is our trade imbalance. So again, between about 2003 and 2007, New Zealand was buying more from the world than they were selling to the world. In the 3 years we've been in office, we've managed to turn that around, but it's one of the reasons we're very focused on building productivity, building the competitiveness of our economy, making sure we're taking pressure off our exporters so that we can do everything we can to lift our exports to the world so that we are selling more to the world than we're buying from the world. And that is a very crucial part of the government's overall strategy. So at the end of the day, it's one of those things, it's always better to have a high credit rating than a lower one. Having said that, AA is still a very high rating relative to a lot of countries around the world, but it shows you that there's a lot of work to be done. We'll be campaigning hard on our economic credentials, which we believe as a government are very good ones, and we'll be taking those policies into the election campaign and ultimately to election day on November 26.